introduced you to a couple of public access producers that I've had a long history with. In 2007, I started a little stream off my laptop. Somebody gave me a free service from something called Red 5, which was openware software, and it was put out by people who really felt that the bad guys were taking over so much, and that they asked that this be shared freely. So a techie guy set it up for me, and I started streaming. I'd usually maybe get 10 people on the line. That was about all my T1 connection could hold. But it was enough to start a trend and a pattern that eventually got the attention of Howard Stern, particularly when I started to get closer to what happened with 9/11 with the directed energy weapons. That was around October of 2007. But the show that I actually kicked it off with, done on, I think it was even on the solstice in 2007, was a show on circumcision, and it's a very volatile topic. I actually had a lesbian Jewish lady calling in, and I think you heard the comment of my husband that lesbian women shouldn't be the ones to make these determinations. But I do think at the end of the day, it is going to be a mother, because I was videotaping for my boyfriend at the time, Alan Steinfeld, what they call a bris. And I thought, religious ceremony, great, I'll go there. And I videotaped it, and I wasn't feeling so well towards the end because, it wasn't what I expected. And the first criticism I had ever heard of circumcision but was by one of the women there, saying that this is a barbaric practice and that she wouldn't do it to her child. And then I realized Judaism is pretty much identified with a covenant, a deal with God, and that to not have circumcision is to not have Judaism. So even this lesbian Jewish lady, she was, making a lot of comments, and she's a friend, and and she gets along very well with Joe. Joe was recounting his story, being at the Yippie Cafe many years ago when he had to listen to hours of lesbian women talking about castrating men at birth.
Whoa.
And that's when he finally stood up and he said, I think we should chop all women's tits off. And then, of course, he said there were about 30 lesbians chasing him down the block. And he goes, fortunately, I could run faster. So Joe always keeps a humor about it. But you can see that a lot of passions run high. There'll be a lot of what you call cognitive dissonance. I mean, after all, what are you going to do after it's been done? Alan and I used to speculate, when Jesus was resurrected, did the foreskin come back, So, you got introduced to a little bit of that, and I want this topic to go as gracefully as possible. As always, Amanda, I want you to be protected because you're giving extremely valuable information about medicine that's hard to get, and many doctors have died for, particularly in this day and age when you've got a pharmaceutical monopoly. So, with all that being said, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it is a tender topic. We're talking mainly about this process that's done in the United States, really in day 1 or 2 of a newborn, and in Judaism it's on day 7 or day 8, depending on the time they're born, and that's the naming ceremony. That's the bris or the Brit. Shalom is the new way of doing it. There's actually Reformed Jewish people who are calling it Brit Shalom over Brit Milah, which is a peaceful naming ceremony as an alternative, because they started to realize it was very hush-hush. But in the Jewish communities, no one wanting to do this to their baby, or at least 50% not wanting to do it to their babies. So there's a website called beyondthebris.com, and there's a book, and they've been doing this for a while, and it's an alternative because they want their religious ceremony to be as holy as possible, as an honor to the baby and the naming and so forth, and they still want to be in their congregation, right? And I mean, I'm not one to really speak on a religion that I'm not a part of. I just want to touch on it for people who are religious and are in Judaism, that there's an alternative and that there's more reformed Jewish individuals who are speaking out and are doing things in a peaceful way and changing this format over, away from circumcision. There was Shem and one of the brothers. So there's Noah, Shem, Arpachshad, Shelah, Eber, all down the lineage, and Ham is one of the brothers. There's Ham and Cush, and Ham and Shem intermarried, and so you see all these lineages, right? And these are all ruler-priest lineages, and they all intermarried, and so these are like the old Canaanites, and that Jesus Christ is considered a descendant of both of these lines, the descendant of Shem and the intermarried priest lines, basically. It's interesting. It went into Leviticus. It went all over the place, and I was like, whoa, this is deep. Essentially, what's interesting is that certain males can be born without a foreskin. It does happen. And I read that it was Shem was born without a foreskin. And he was one of the revered priests, and his story is strong in Judaism. I'm not a professional in this discussion, but it was an interesting thing that popped out in my research, right? That this honor of priestly lineage doesn't have a foreskin. And could that have been in honor of him to cut and remove foreskin, or even seen as a divine sign that he was born without it, that others should follow suit? And I found that was very striking for me when I read that. Now, we do know, I have read some arguments of rabbis and so forth, and really what we're seeing is really out-of-date information and myth and old ritual that perhaps they don't want to give up on or change their ways or whatever, this stubborn sort of thing. It was basically, in America, is as a whole, we'll talk about that. So we're just talking about the Judaism side of it. But then America is not all Jewish. Well, some could argue, but it's not all Jewish. So why on earth is at the highest population of circumcision in males in America? Why did this happen, or how did this happen? And everywhere else, it's very low, or it's declined quite considerably. And in America, it's still 50% or even more. In Canada, it's about 30%. And in the UK, it's almost nil. It's down to like 10%, right? It's a trend that has been declining and on a constant decline. We do know, as we're educating ourselves more and more, as more and more science comes to light, we are reducing this really old practice based on an idea that, the smegma was that was the lubricant and that's underneath the foreskin was causing disease, leading to cancers or causing all kinds of sexual problems, or the fact that they had this erogenous tissue were leading to hypermasturbation in males, and that they couldn't control themselves. All these kinds of myths. And one by one, they've all been disproved. To say that circumcision reduces cancer rates it's just not true. I've looked at the data. I looked at all the studies that were in either direction. And as usual, when you're looking at studies, you have to be very careful. You have to look at how the study was run and who ran it. And You have to look for agenda behind that. You have to tease that out. And I did find agenda in people who were running the studies. The history of the OBGYNs, they really wanted this. It almost became like an obsession. It became like a very sick obsession, where I actually read one story where the OBGYNs, this one obstetrician, did a circumcision on an unborn male, where the child was still being born. He was born breech, and he was only half out of the canal, and he was given a circumcision. And that's no joke. That's a true story, and it's probably not the only one. It's really become like an obsession or something. And what happens with these trends is once they start, like we know with trends, once a trend begins, it's very hard to stop. It's easy to start and hard to stop trends, and that's what we've got with circumcision. So since this show is in the United States, I'm going to focus on how this happened in the United States and where it's come to. And it really, there were some interesting, strange cases where it seemed to be curative, and this is where it began. It was back in the 1800s where there was a case of a boy who was having issues on a lot of levels of his body. And basically he was called to, the surgeon was called to see what was going on, saw that the boy who was 5, he was very white and delicate, and had knees, his knees were flexed, he couldn't straighten his legs. They were even going to consider cutting his hamstrings, so he couldn't stand up straight. And they noticed that his genitals the penis was normal, but the glans was small, and he had a contracted foreskin over the meatus, and it was puffed out, it was red, it was looking infected, and that the nurse who was in charge of this boy said that it was chronic, that he had this for quite a long time. And the surgeon had this brilliant idea to cut the foreskin off and relieve the boy. And of course, it worked very well because the boy was prostrating in pain, and it was affecting his nervous system, and he was unable to fire off the nerves in his legs of having this problem for so long. And after this case, and there was another sort of similar to it, it was touted as kind of a miraculous heal-all, that because it helped this boy stand up straight again, that now it was going to cure arthritis to to brain tumor to whatever, and this myth began from there, from this point in time, and this is in America.
What year was that?
I think it was like 1870 or so.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So this is how it began as a ritual on the medical side of things. That it's there's medical benefit, because you have to remember the times, right? Like even when we're just talking about Judaism, like you have to remember the times in which people were very ritualistic, way more than we are now. Very sacrificial. You sacrifice yourself to God. These kinds of belief systems, right? And we have to remember the context of the times in which it was done and the reasons for that. I mean, they were back in those days in Egypt. There were child sacrifices too. Is that okay today? No. So why are other sacrifices like this.
Oh, absolutely, there were child sacrifices. I mean, there's areas where the population is so poor that a mother doesn't have enough food for all of her children, and she has to make a decision. I mean, we can't even imagine that. We live in a society that educates us with entertainment, and we don't get all of the stories. So I think that's very important.
There's still child sacrifice going on today, but that's that's in the satanic elite that do that. But I'm just saying the context is everything, right, of why these behaviors were done. And then when time distills, things get handed down and we lose the meaning behind the ritual of why we do the things we do or why those things are done. And then you ask your mom, well, why is this done? Well, it's just because it's always been the way it's been. Or this is always the way we've done it, or we're doing it because it's our covenant with God. It's our agreement for protection. That's why we sacrifice a piece of you for the protection of from God. That's our agreement. It's in the Bible. No questions asked. The end, right? And it becomes taboo to talk about things like that as well. At the Beyond the Bris website, this is discussed in a really good video on there. It just says the main problem is the secrecy around it, that everyone's tiptoeing around the discussion, that people are feeling certain ways but not talking about it. And she was trying to open the discussion and also open the discussion with rabbis, and there were two particular ones that would do brisses without having the circumcision. So there's more and more acceptance of it. And now there's argument that it doesn't have any negative issues and that it's beneficial. And that's just not supported by science on any level at all. For one, we do have an excellent study that was done of a mother who basically sacrificed her son for science, essentially, saying she wanted her son, when he is circumcised, to be underneath an MRI, and the MRI to see what's going on with his brain, because it's traumatic. It's significant trauma, but there was no proof of this significant trauma. And I'm proud of this because this is it was MRI, and they also did a PET, and the PET, the positron emission tomography, it was developed in Kingston, Ontario, so that's a Canadian invention. But anyway, they did the MRI imaging. They also improved on that, and this study, the baby was in the machine for several minutes to generate a baseline, of the normal metabolic activity in the brain, and then it was used as to compare the data, so after the surgery. And what happened is after they circumstrained, it's called, using Velcro restraints. So just that alone, just taking an infant and restraining them is traumatizing, just that alone. Yeah. And then they tape their head with surgical tape to the board, and then they put the baby in the MRI machine, and then the doctor could have access to the penis for circumcision. He had to use a plastic bell, not the metal bell, because of the magnetic fields. And there was no anesthetic used, as they do not use, which is another thing. It's very unique with circumcision. There's rules around surgery, and this is broken with circumcision, with using no anesthetic, for example. And so the analysis of the MRI data after showed that there was a huge damage to the victim's brain associated with reasoning, perception, and emotions. And they did follow-up tests on that infant 1 day, 1 week, and 1 month after the surgery. And what they saw is that the child's brain never returned to its baseline configuration. So basically it was permanently changed by the surgery. Now, this is one type of piece of science that's very valuable, because I wouldn't want any other child to have to go through a circumcision to get this piece of evidence again. I wouldn't want to encourage a study, because I think we already know. But this is a valuable study done by Paul D. Tenari, Ph.D. He's the Pacific Institute of Advanced Study, the director, and it's open literature, so you can find that out. You can go to circumcision.org/brain to find what I read, okay? What I just relayed to you, okay?
Yeah.
Any argument that says that it doesn't cause brain damage, or any type of Google search where it says it's nonsense, that's just, they're spinning it, okay? So be aware that you're going to have a backlash with these things, and it's really laced in ignorance. And as we were mentioning, cognitive dissonance, where you really don't want to see the truth that's before your eyes. Now, there's so many myths, it's really hard to get through them all. But the myth of it being cleaner, think about this. Are your eyelids dirty? Like, people often compare the foreskin to the eyelids. So if you went and took your eyelids off, would your eyes be cleaner? No. In fact, it's the other way around. Your blinking is cleaning your eye. And it's similar to how the glands of the penis is. The secretions there are essential because they moisten the tissue, just like your eyelid moistens your eye. And in the studies I looked at, there was not one single study that confirmed a carcinogenic property to these secretions. And as we know of the germ theory being false, we understand that a bacteria does not cause a disease. The disease is already there, and the bacteria comes in to eat away the dead tissue that's already been made. Okay, and that's the same with any type of smegma you want to talk about.
Because of bad nutrition and stress.
Poor nutrition, and also think about any orifice, any bodily orifice that is in direct communication with the outside world has to have certain enzymes and secretions to protect non-self from coming in. And also, on a sexual organ, you're interacting with other partners, and you're intermingling self and non-self more often. And these types of interactions, in fact, they find that there's a high preponderance of diseases seen when that individual's had more than 20 partners in their life, just from exposures and possibly not high nutrition, but the exposure has to be dealt with by the body and cleaned up by the body. And if it's not, then things can linger, and DNA can communicate with other DNA, and there can be issues there. But it's not to say that it's because it's a sexually transmitted disease. It's really coming from your own reactions, and your own bodily fluids are trying to clean things up. And if they can't, then that's where issues can arise. Even with HPV, that there is no virus, there is no HPV virus.
What's HPV?
A human papilloma virus, where they say it causes cervical cancer in women, and it causes penile cancer in males. That there's two types that are more virulent than others, the 16 and 18, and there's tons of different serotypes of it, and yada, yada, yada. It's all lies, because what it is, again, is anytime there's someone claiming they're seeing a virus, they're seeing a particle of your own somatids that have come to an area that's already damaged, and it is trying to repair DNA. And if it cannot repair that DNA, if it fails in its job, then it will begin the process of changing form to fungus, and it will begin the cancer creation process, because it will try now to wall off that damage instead, because it couldn't repair it. And that's where you get the cancer cells forming. It's a mutation format because it's unable to repair the DNA from the so-called virus particle, which is coming from your own body, which is your own bacteria, create that in order as toolboxes in order to go to the tissue to repair it. If it fails its job, then that can occur. And just because they're taking out these cells and identifying them and labeling them and naming them fancily and making CGI pictures of them doesn't mean that it's coming from an external source and doesn't mean it's infectious. And that's where it goes wrong. But they're saying with circumcision that when you get circumcised, you have a reduced rate of HPV infection, and that's also not supported by scientific literature at all. Now, it's like saying you're crying and your tears are going to cause cancer. You know, those secretions in the penis are not going to cause cancer, and that's one of the arguments for circumcision. It was old belief system. 20th century doctors, like they thought it was unhygienic to have these things. They had no clue what the reason for anything is, and I don't really know if we've come that far, to be honest. Than then, so the hygienic myth is just perpetuated. Now, if you think it's easier to clean your child's penis because it doesn't have a foreskin, then, I don't clean inside my child's vagina. I just, it's a self-cleaning machine, you know. It's the same thing with the penis. It cleans itself. Or, even your ears. Your ears make, does the cerumen inside your ears, your earwax, does that cause cancer? If the smegma caused cancer, then your earwax should cause cancer too. It's just as ridiculous. And it's just as easy. It's cleaning itself out. The boogers in your nose, right? They're cleaning themselves out. It's cleaning out toxins. It's the same exact thing. It's just self-clean. It's a self-cleaning oven. You never, the rule is just clean what's seen. You never retract an infant's penis because you can rip the tissue. It's not prepared to retract. There's a certain time in which it will retract on its own. When they're starting to become prepubescent, it will retract. Sometimes there's issues with it. The issues are lack of education because it's such a taboo topic that nobody is training anybody to how to actually take care of an intact penis. But basically, you clean what's seen, and sometimes when things are beginning to slide and they're starting to get erections, there can be issues where it's not allowing the flow of the foreskin over the head of the shaft of the penis. And even when they urinate, they can urinate inside that foreskin. And that's normal, and that can happen, and it will figure itself out. I did have a case where I was helping a boy go through this process, and he was having problems and some pain. And we just instructed him how to gently moisten, use some castor oil and gently moisten things, and helped things along a little bit more, and he was fine. It was about a week, and upped his nutrition, and everything went just A-okay. Didn't need, but guess what? His mom came to me frantic because she was taking him to the doctor, and the doctor was saying, we have to circumcise. Like they were just so hot at the knife for this kid. And I think he was 8 or 9. And I said, oh my gosh, no, like let's just give it time. Just tell him to be quiet. Just don't go back until things are resolved, and then maybe you need to teach this doctor a few things. And that's exactly what ended up happening, and she was pleased that she didn't need to go through that because they were really pressuring her, and they do that. But not only that, the parents are so brainwashed into it that there was one story I read in my research of a surgeon, or I think it was, I can't remember if it was obstetrician or what the title was, but the attending doctor or nurse on the birth in the hospital, unfortunately it was a hospital birth, but the mother, the child was born forceps birth. It was a violent birth. It was problems. He wasn't breathing when he was born. He had fracture and he also had a crushed part of his skull crushed from the forceps delivery, so it was a very traumatic birth. The child then was brought to the mother after, doing what they had to do they resuscitated him, and they, got him wrapped up and everything, and was handing him to the mother, and the mother immediately said, "When can he be circumcised?" That was the first thing out of her mouth. When can he be circumcised? Right? Like, there's something mentally going on here that is very strange, right? The programming of it. And I looked at some studies where they were looking at different areas and different ethnicities, and what was considered normal or not. And in America, it got so bizarre that they started to take out the showers from the school gymnasiums, and kids would just walk around stinky instead of actually showering where they would see each other naked. And it's gotten this very macabre way where no other male sees any other male's penis in just a normal, like, you'd go to a nude beach or you'd shower in public showers. Like, it wasn't uncommon. Like, I would go swimming in my youth, and I would be showering with naked, like, other women. They're naked. They take their bathing suits off. Like, I saw other women's bodies. It was a no big deal. No big deal. It's not like everything's hypersexualized like it is, right? So everything's taboo. Everything's hypersexualized. Everything has to be private. You're not allowed to see anything anymore. And to the point where many men will never see another real man's penis in their life, right? Because of this hypersexualized paranoia privacy thing, right? And I think that's just kind of, we've gotten weird. And what happens when you don't have this just normal, healthy behavior, it gets twisted, and then you get obsessions where people are obsessed to see it, and they'll go into porn, or they'll try to find other ways of figuring out what other people's bodies look like or whatnot, right? It just gets very seedy. Okay, and then there's this whole idea that the foreskin is just useless. It's just a useless flappo skin. My goodness, that with the stuff we're learning. I mean, I did a YouTube video about the 20. There's more than 20, I would say, but the 20 different anatomical or functional aspects of the foreskin. So you can go and watch that, because I'm not going to repeat all that. But there's a lot of parts to it.
Right.
There's a lot of tissue involved. There's a lot of different kinds of cells. They're involved in stimulating the brain in certain ways. They help you mate properly or pick the proper mate for having proper neurological connections with the female. There are estrogen receptors on the foreskin that communicate with the female. I mean, this is God's creation, which is perfect. And I find it so ironic.
Excuse me, Amanda, how does it help you pick a mate?
Well, the understanding is that when first of all, the estrogen receptors picking up different estrogen off different females, right? So if you're feeling aroused, there's a pheromone, right? There's a pheromone trigger. So there's this kind of interaction between a male and a female, right? And if the pheromones are off, you won't be interested in them, right? They've done studies on all of that. Like, if the scent of someone, right, can put you off. That's why the perfume industry is so huge. My goodness, it's all pheromone triggering. It's getting the musk of a man, right? The scent of a woman. It's this calling that's beyond how they look or whatnot. It's this.
It's like a genital nose.
What?
Like a genital nose?
A genital nose, yeah.
Okay.
Like that. And when there's intercourse, there is a nervous system communication going on. The nervous system tissue that's in the female is connecting with the nervous system tissue on the foreskin. And there's a nuance going on there with the sexual interaction, but there's deeper communication, most likely about fertility. Now, are you fertile? Are you compatible on a fertile level with each other? Right? Those kinds of communications. And we have only really started to understand this. This is the thing. We have been buried in such myth for so long, we haven't even been allowed to do the research to show that this is the case. The other dark side to the foreskin, the circumcision industry, is that the foreskin is sold for skincare products, stem cell research. It's put into vaccines because it's a pluripotent cell, so it's type of cell on the foreskin that you can use in lineages. Well, those are mainly fetal cells, but you can find special cells that you can grow your vaccine medium on that's more stable. But mainly it's being used for, because this is baby foreskin, this is new stuff. It's being used for youthful appearance in skin. If you want youthful appearance, you can just use DMSO.
I was going to say that. I'll pick
that.
Yeah, I'd pick DMSO any day.
Yeah, I'd take DMSO any day over a baby penis foreskin on my face, thanks. But that's what's happening, There's a whole market, a whole industry, and there's a whole money-making thing going on here. And actually, that's what's really perpetuated it in the States. So after that experience with where it seemed to be a cure-all for everything, and it caught on like that, what happened, it was after the war. There were things going on. First of all, soldiers in World War I, it was done to them. Of course, always soldiers are fodder for experimentation. But in World War II, after, the UK was really, like England was really, they were destroyed after World War II. And the circumcision rates went way down to nil because they didn't have the resources to do it, and they couldn't justify doing it. And so the trend kind of faded away more there. But in America, it was like the opposite. It just went to, where 90% of boys, it was just unheard of not to be circumcised. It's been a long-time trend. It just got really rooted in there. And it happened because after the war, you had all these surgeons and obstetricians and board-stiff doctors that needed a job. They needed something to do. They wanted to make extra money. It really came down to the capitalism of it that kept it going, that kept it driven. I was amazed when I was reading about that this is like a make-work project for doctors, right? And a way to make money. And
it's
what
like
they
the,
cared
it's
about.
like the pro se office in the courts giving unemployed lawyers jobs to misrepresent your case before the judge.
Yeah. Like, oh, we got nothing better to do, so let's make some trouble, right?
Yeah.
And that's really how it got established. That's the Coles notes, of how America got so trapped in this circumcision silliness and traumatizing generations of males. And you can see it. The evidence is clear, right? So no, it's not a useless flap of skin. Is it aesthetically nicer? Brainwashed women will say yes, but I say no because, first of all, intact means that they are sexy on another level, but also the dried out head of the penis. See, that's an internal organ. The head of the penis is actually supposed to be an internal, moist organ. It's got a more pink color to it. It's shiny. It's lubricated, and it's not meant to be exposed. So when when it's exposed, it's supposed to be in a vagina. So in another moist worm spot. Yeah. It's not supposed to just hang out all the time. And when that happens, those cells damage. And in fact, there was studies when I was looking on the cancer stats. There were studies that showed that there's a higher preponderance of cancer in circumcised males because the head of the penis is now exposed and dries out, and those cells weren't really meant to be like that. And I think that's ugly. I think it looks like an old turtle head, like an old tortoise that's been around for thousands of years. I don't find it that pretty, just saying.
Well, what can circumcised men do after the fact?
Actually,
use castor oil?
You can never get it back, okay? You can never get back the functional tissue. But there are devices like the TLC tugger that you can buy and adhere to there is still some movable skin, and that can be encouraged to stretch with some pressure. And so it's a device that you apply some pressure over a concentrated period of time during the day, and it will start to stretch the tissue. So it's like you're making a mock turtleneck.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're crocheting. No, I'm just kidding. But you're getting more skin out of that, and you can get that turtle back in the cave again a little bit. And it does help the males have better sex. See, it's not just about better sex, but that's an important part of it, because if you're feeling content with your mate, you're less likely to cheat. You'll be more having an enjoyable time. The female will not get dried out from the constant having to drain their lubrication away from the constant rough stimulation, because the foreskin is supposed to glide the penis shaft back and forth. There's not a lot of rubbing movement. It's an accordion kind of gliding inside, right?
I see what you're saying, yeah.
And it's not this like taking a stick and going, rubbing in and out, like constantly, and it dries out the female, chase the female. It can be very painful for the female, and equally for the male. It can rub the male too, right? So it can be a displeasurable experience, and that can lead to a dysfunctional relationship if you can't be intimate or you don't know another way to be intimate. And my friend Steve, he wrote on my Facebook page today, he wrote something really cool. He was talking about there's other ways to make love, He says, as a damaged, circumcised male, first of all, we're not meant to spread our seed the way is happening, that we're meant to tantrically pull it back within us, but that if you're intimate and you're touching, there's other erogenous zones of the body. And his point was that there's other ways than just penis-vagina stimulation to make love and to, have a connection. However, a lot of people don't know that. They don't know how to do that, or they've lost that connection. Now, circumcision is not painless, and it's not quickly forgotten, as we discussed, but it also does have other side effects from the surgery, like anything where you'd have post-traumatic stress, like decreased appetite. It can really mess around with breastfeeding, normal breastfeeding, so there's negative side effects to bonding. Would you trust your parents if they did this to you? I mean, on a subconscious level? I wouldn't. Like, welcome to the world. Now we're going to traumatize you and take you to this level of pain that you've never experienced, and now you're going to trust us, now bond with us, now make eye contact with us, right? While you're in pain, while you're just trying to get through this trauma. It's a horrible thing to do to anybody, especially to a newborn. It affects sleep patterns of the newborn, diminishes their REM sleep. The tearing, they actually tear, so they don't just, there's different types of, there's a bell type gadget, torture device, there's a bunch of them. They're just horrible looking contraptions. But they amputate, it's an amputation, but there's crushing and tearing involved in these very extremely sensitive parts. And you think you're sensitive when you're an infant, everything's extra sensitive. So we do know the brain chemistry is modified forever. Some people don't actually get over it in their whole lives. And many are, there's deaths. Obviously, it can cause deaths. This happens. There are about 1 million, in the United States, there's about 1 million circumcisions of boys per year. And I think it's 1 to 2% of those are deaths, and there's a high bleed rate where they won't stop bleeding. And they have to be put on be hospitalized, other trauma, right, where they're having to be monitored. They can have to be, get infections, other problems, and that one intervention begets another, and they're on antibiotics and so forth, and just unnecessary, completely unnecessary surgery. It's considered really a cosmetic procedure, and but all of these medical groups kind of look the other way. Now, just because your neighbor got it done doesn't mean you have to, and it's really interesting, the psychology around it, that it's like supposed to be some sort of rite of passage, or but everybody's done it and you're going to look weird kind of thing. I mean, or your daddy has it, so you should, or your brother has it, so you should match. Like, this is the psychology. I don't really have much to say other than that's mental illness. That's just, if someone thinks like that, they're not mentally sound. There's a lot of regret moms out there that have witnessed. If anyone's really questioning whether it's hurting a baby or not, I just invite you to go to YouTube and just watch a circumcision process in action. That should help you with your decision if you're not sure what you're going to do if you have a boy. That will help you. If once you're finished throwing up, I think you'll make the decision to not torture your child like that and think that it's a loving thing to do. Okay, so the STD myth is, and the whole AIDS thing, oh my gosh.
About 3 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's so much on this topic. I mean, I did prepare for 2 hours, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, we can do it next time. There's so many important things happening at the FCC on the 5G rollout that we can't do it next week, but maybe the following week. And
yeah,
then,
we'll see.
and then
we'll
I can put this out.
Goes.
Yeah, get some more feedback. I want to. Are you finished with that?
Yeah. I mean, my main thing is that it's really just do your research, and the science doesn't stand, and there's a lot of myth and a lot of agenda behind it, and just do your due diligence, as with all topics that I bring to light.
I think that's really important, and I wanted, to emphasize in the spirit of nonviolent communication that we be able to listen to each other, try to reserve judgment, blame, and try to figure out what we can put on the table to make life more wonderful for us. Because if Amanda was saying that 1 million of these are done a year, what is the evidence in our society that we are moving towards being peaceful, being charitable to each other on an international level, being known as a country that's really living up to its agreements, saying that we're going by the Constitution and we're about freedom, and yet we have such high incarceration rates when people don't have satisfactory relationships, starting with the most intimate and then moving on to relationships in society, in our nation, and then in our world. I think it's worthy of proceeding very carefully.
Thank you again, Paula, and it's always great to be on your show.
Okay, thank you, Amanda.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.